Hi, everybody, and welcome to the regular podcast. This is episode 3 in our series. Today we'll be discussing public transportation, and the systems associated with it for individuals with disability. So, joining me today, we have Storm.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see everyone again.
Welcome. We have Nathan.
Hello.
And we have Camille.
Hi, everyone.
Amazing. So I think we should get right into the first question. If you would like me to ask it, I shall.
Sure.
So our first question for today. So what are some of the biggest negatives you can draw from the current public transportation system within Australia? I will leave it to both of you to discuss.
Okay.
How long do you have?
All the time in the world.
Okay. Well, I can think of one thing right off the bat, and that is getting access to important things to use public transport effectively. So that's your companion card, your MyKey card, and all that sort of stuff, and all the drama that goes along with it to try to get one of those cards to access public transport. That's really, really difficult because you need to provide evidence that you have a disability and it's impacting on your disability when using public transport, and that can be a very difficult process for a lot of people. So that's one. I'll pass it on to Nathan now. What's an early crack for you, Nathan?
I think one of the biggest hazards I find when accessing public transport, having lived now in 2 states, one of the biggest problems is when the guards aren't there to open the gate for you after hours. And I also find that a big problem is, and not many people know this, but if you have a disability and you fit the criteria, you can actually access a free public transport card. But the problem is it's not widely advertised enough, and even then, it doesn't. At least the Melbourne one doesn't account for the fact that some people can't reach the MyKey pad.
Yep, absolutely.
So and one of the things they've actually done in Queensland to kind of combat this is basically it works as an ID card, and they give you a lanyard with a little slip. So you basically show it to the security guard as if you're like a VIP or a snob, and then you get waved through. So, and I think that's something that.
Well, here in Melbourne, it got to the point where, as you said, I couldn't reach the thing, so I just pretty much got my ID card out and just showed him, and then they let me through. So yeah.
And I think I don't know what you. So.
Yep, you go, Nathan.
I was just going to quickly say to Storm, I think the other big thing, and we were talking about this earlier today, was especially with public transport and even shopping centres, is the fact that they always try to, even though they have the best intentions in the world, lock the disabled toilet and keep the key behind the desk, so that by the time you realise the disabled toilet's locked, you have to go back to reception and try not to soil yourself in order to just go to the toilet.
Yeah, and I think that was a really, really bad move sometimes by the security guards, because when you've got to go, you've got to go. I mean, you don't have time to wait for people to say, yep, I've got the key, just give me a couple of minutes. Sometimes, you don't have that luxury. So you need to go, you need to go. So, because...
Yeah, that's true.
People's, functions, don't always work the way that able-bodied people's work. And that's what they don't understand either. So I can completely relate to that, because I remember a few times where the security guard forgot where he put his key, and then I had to just suck it up and just wait for the train to go walk home to actually go to the toilet, because the guy lost the key. So bad luck. And there's no way my wheelchair can fit into the public transport toilets, because it's not big enough. It's too small. So that was
Yeah, I
horrible.
haven't experienced that as well. Because one of my clients, so we're going to the city, so and we have to take the train because we came from Geelong, and then when we go to the train station, so one of the what do you call this, elevator is not working, so we have to go all the way on the other street just to just to get to the other train that goes to the city, which is very hard for me and for my client as well.
Did you say to the people down there, look, I need help because my client's having difficulties? And what was their response if there was a response?
Well, that's what they told me. I'm sorry that this one is not working. What you can do is just go on the other side of the street and go all around the train,
Oh
just
my God.
the other street. So I was like, oh God, we're going to be late because the train is coming like 5 minutes and I have to like a little bit of run.
Um, yeah, and also I don't know if Nathan's experienced this, and I'm pretty sure Carmel's has experienced it before, is where you are early and you're about 5 minutes early, and the train driver knows you're there, and you're in that yellow spot, and for some odd reason is that they don't really pull the ramp out. They just can't be bothered going out of the carriage and putting you into the carriage, and the carriage is nice and not packed, and they still don't want to
Yeah.
pull the ramp out for you. And I just find that absolutely disrespectful.
Yeah, I would find often, Storm, that there was probably only a handful of times, at least when I was in Melbourne, where you'd stand in the designated disability spot, and the driver, even if they were a couple of minutes early or the train was just about to begin its run, the driver would actually wait until like 30 seconds before it has to go to decide, oh, I think there's a ramp out and let him on, when there's like a herd of people, behind you pushing.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
But later on in the podcast, me and Nathan will come up with some solutions to these problems. And I think that, if the government is listening, I would, generally appreciate that some of these ideas be put to the government and to try to get these underway. Because it won't just benefit me, it'll benefit the whole community.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just remember, Storm, we live in the age of Big Brother. The government is always listening.
Yes, and they're watching, looking and watching.
Absolutely. And I think another question I have for both of you to actually discuss is just in terms of training provided, do you think there could be more training provided, not only to people working within the public transport industry, but even to individuals just taking public transport, simple little things, maybe signage, maybe a small little detailed pamphlet handed out,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, definitely. I think that especially when it comes to trains, people need to be aware that when a sign says that, this spot or these seats are reserved for, pregnant women or those with disabilities, people need to take that seriously, because often, especially in Melbourne, I'd get on a train and those fold down seats are taken up and you've got most of the general public seats like a half empty, because people, decide that they want more leg room.
Yeah.
And then you have that awkward thing where you get on and they feel kind of guilty and they have to get up and then move.
Exactly. And then you shouldn't even be in that position to ask them to move, because they're the ones that should be moving in the first place.
Yeah. And I think the one thing I'll say when it comes to etiquette as well, I think that especially, I don't know if you've ever had this, Storm, but oftentimes when if I've taken a public bus in a suburb or wherever it may be, if I've got someone with me, the bus driver will look at the person that's with me to put the ramp down to get on the bus when they're supposed to do it.
I know. And I've even had times where I'm with my friends and they don't even ask me where I'm actually going. They actually ask my friend where they're going.
Yeah.
But, that's that lack of respect in that area.
Yeah.
And I've even had times where the train driver has problems putting the ramp down because he's not been trained into it. So I guess from me and Nathan's point of view is the solution would be get those people trained up before
Yeah.
they actually do their job. That way there's no sort of stress regarding that. You need to take that extra time to know and understand what the procedures are in doing that
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've learnt, Storm, and this is a great tip for anyone that's watching this, is my wife especially doesn't enjoy, say, you know, interacting with people in the general public that she doesn't know, which is fair enough. And we've often found that, like, say, whether I go anywhere, whether it be in a taxi, Uber, whatever it is, or somewhere, you know, in the general public sphere, the person will, you know, want to talk to her, not to the guy in the wheelchair. So what my wife does is, when I go up to someone, my wife won't make eye contact with them, because it will force the person to look to me rather than my wife.
That is a great tip.
You know, so whenever you're with someone, just make sure that that person doesn't, you know, as rude as this may sound, doesn't make any eye contact or acknowledge the person until they acknowledge you.
Yeah, that is a fantastic tip.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Absolutely. I think it's yeah, just very detrimental to kind of just know the courteous ways to even just approach and just deal with a certain circumstance as well. And I think it's just interesting to me, because another thing that I was trying to think of was just, do you guys think that the kind of values and morals and just the ethics we're taught over here impact a lot of the way that we perceive a certain circumstance with, well, I guess in regards to disability or how to deal with disability?
I think a lot of the transport problems is due to what you've just said, Aziki, about manners and respect and how to treat people with disabilities.
Yeah.
That's probably like 70% of the problem, and then the 30% of the 100% is actually the facilities and the way the system is being made up.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think if we get that 70% correct, I think people will have a lot more better experience, because they know that they'll be treated well and safe and be respected and just be acknowledged. I think that's what we really want, and not just another number on the train. So,
and I think what makes this problem deeper is that this isn't necessarily just an issue that stems, you know, from public transport alone. This is an issue that's, you know, stemmed through every, I guess, facet of life. Like, I think, for example, my wife and I went to a like a chain restaurant. I think it was like one of those like steakhouses, like a Hog's Breath or something similar to that. And, like, for example, when, you know, the person, when I want to order, for example, the person would look to my wife almost as if to verify that I can, you know, that I'm free to have a steak or a burger, as if I'm like a 4-year-old.
That's terrible. That's terrible.
And the thing is, you kind of get that on like public transport in a way where, you know, someone will either treat you like you're 5 rather than just simply saying, "Oh, where are you getting off, mate?" Like.
Yeah, and you know, Australia is all about mateship and caring about one another, and you just feel like that's lacking in certain areas, in certain situations.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, it goes against our values, and that's what the question was about. And I feel like that at times when you use public transport, it does feel like that. And I just wanted to run through with Nathan is that I thought it would be a good idea just to bring up some ideas about some sort of policy where they actually have to, before they even make anything, they have to run through with people with disabilities first to understand, okay, if we do a certain part of this ramp, how easy is it for you to cross that area? So do run throughs before it actually becomes a problem. So fix it before it actually becomes a problem. That way, you don't have people suffering and trying to figure out, okay, if the lift doesn't work, how are we going to get down? There's no way you can get down. So why don't you come up with something else beforehand? I know in Japan, when I was recently for my last holiday, the lift wasn't working. So what they did was they got like this machine and they put me in this machine with the wheelchair inside of it, and they just gradually got me down step by step with this machine. It was a fantastic invention. And I
Yeah,
just think that a lot of the public transport things, before they're even used, need to come up with a plan to say, okay, if I was
yeah,
in disability shoes, would I like this? How comfortable would this be for that person?
Hmm. Absolutely, and I think it comes down to kind of just the provision of how much you're willing to actually invest or how much you're
yeah,
willing to actually put into the system. Because I think when it comes to public transport in Australia, there just isn't enough, I guess, investment or enough consideration of why they should do it. It comes down
yeah,
to kind of the financial aspect, but it shouldn't. It should come down to comfort,
yeah,
accessibility. How can we make it better for you? And I
yeah.
think,
Because I know in my experience, it's been that whole thing where over here, Storm, basically, in my experience, if a lift's not working, it's basically essentially, well, too bad, you'll have to go to another train station or take a taxi. And so, and in very rare
Horrible.
occasions, sometimes what, and I don't know if it's still Metro services, but I know what Metro and V-Line used to do was if the train wasn't working, sometimes in exceptional circumstances, if, for example, there was an occasion where I couldn't take one of their buses, so they paid for a taxi instead. But that's usually a very, very rare circumstance, even when that does happen.
Yeah, but the fact is, it should never get to that point. There should always
Yeah,
be a solution for when Plan A doesn't work. And I think that's where public transport in Australia is lacking, is that they don't think
yeah,
outside the box, or they just
hmm,
don't want to because it takes time out of their day to
yeah.
really think of it.
And I think too, when it comes to like the etiquette of people, I have no problem with, I guess I'd say people of other cultures to be, diplomatic, coming over and building a life. But I think if they're going to take a job that requires them to be like a transport officer or something like that, they should be trained as part of the job in how to deal with people in the Australian culture. Like
Absolutely, absolutely.
say for example, if you get someone who is of, and I'll just say for argument's sake, Sri Lankan or Indian descent, they may not know how to interact with, a Caucasian male born in Australia who's never even set foot outside the country. So it's one of those things where, and I'm not saying that to be mean, but it's one of those things where, when you're going to, go to another country and you're going to, live and work here, that's all fine and dandy, but you do need to kind of acclimatize, so to speak, to our, culture and how we interact with one another. Because
Yeah,
I find as well, a lot of taxi drivers in that kind of culture have that problem where they don't understand that, okay, yeah, you're picking up a passenger, but they can be also very grumpy sometimes, very standoffish. And a lot of the times I find that they'll have a headset in their ears and they don't want to make an ounce of conversation. I think, well, I'm paying your wage. The least you can do is
exactly.
talk to me. Like,
so
Yeah,
in that aspect, do you think there should be more training provided to maybe individuals of that, maybe English is a second language, English is a second language in Asia, or the kind of
yeah.
cold, like a culturally and linguistically diverse, that kind of avenue? You think there should be more training provided to them to
yeah,
understand
absolutely,
disability?
absolutely, Ziggy.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I would even go as far as to say, is if you don't complete the disability course of the train, then you don't pass getting into a public transport job. Because the reality is, 1 in 5 of us have a disability of some sort, and they need to be ready for all situations. And if you're not ready for that, then you need to find another job, because
And
it's bad enough that it's bad enough that we have to live with our disability and having problems with it each and every day, and then you've got this on top of public transport issues, and it just makes the experience far worse, and it's actually ruining our independence. So you know, it's not a good thing. So they need to do that before they
Yeah.
do any other training
And I think
involved.
the other thing too is if a new train station is going to be built, I think what they need to do is get people, you know, a sample of the general public, both able-bodied and those with physical, mental, all types of disabilities, and sit
Absolutely.
down as a focus group and say what do you need? Like, because for example, the deaf have a hearing loop. I know of people with autism that would have sensory issues to loud sounds and lights and things like that. And one of the things that I've noted, Storm, is that a lot of the old train stations, even some of the ones that were built probably in the early 2000s, don't have a proper platform that actually meets the train. I think what they need to do when they build a new station is raise the platform to meet the height of the train, so that rather than having to get a ramp out, you can just roll on.
That would be the biggest change that I would implement, because I've had a lot of issues where the guys put the ramp down and he's asked me to do like go on a straight line. And when I go on a straight line, because my wheelchair doesn't like to go up too much, it struggles to get to that last bit of hump to go to the top. And what happens is we spend like 10 or 5 minutes to try to work out how to get this wheelchair on. And the the train driver, is panicking because he's more worried about getting on time rather than worrying about my problem with my wheelchair and trying to get me in a safe position before, exiting that station. So again,
I think
do run throughs before you implement stuff.
Yeah,
that's the key.
And I think part of the issue for that is, and I don't know if this is still the case, Storm, but basically I've heard that Metro are essentially fined by the whoever, like, the train authority is within the government, for every delay they have, and that's why there's so much pressure on train drivers to be on time. So I think there's a twofold problem, in the sense that they are so focused on being on time that they end up making themselves late anyway, because at some point they haven't focused on taking care of the passenger that just needs to get on without being injured or hurt. And the other thing I've noticed is that the ramps can barely fit a large mobility scooter on them. And I don't know if they've done this yet or not, but I'd heard that back when I was in Melbourne, or even just before I left, that by 2020, every tram that was supposed to travel around Melbourne was meant to be a low floor tram, because those with disabilities can't access the ones that, the ones you get on that have like about 4 or 5 flights of stairs on them, just to,
I had a shocking experience on the train, so on the trams, and I just didn't even want to go on them because the danger was just too much. It was just too much to worrying about, because one of the trams didn't even have a ramp on it, so they literally had to carry me onto the tram, and I thought, I don't feel safe, and I don't want my equipment broken, so I just thought, we'll just wait for the next available tram. But the fact is, we live in 2020 now. We shouldn't be having these issues anymore with ramps. It should be compulsory. Shouldn't need to.
With the train station, so does every train have a disability toilet?
No, so public trains, at least in Victoria, generally don't. The V line trains that travel to the country will. And I know that Storm's going to love what I'm about to say, but in Queensland, most of the trains will have a fully accessible toilet with an electronic push button and lock.
Yes.
I noticed I noticed some of I did ride some regional trains, and I noticed some of those accessible toilets. Because with my client, I need to do a hoist, so some of them, they don't really have hoist, which is really bad. Because I was thinking that they should. I think if there's a changes that could be implemented better. I think in every accessible toilet in all over Australia, if they could put like a just simple hoist in there, and that could be
Well,
helpful with carers as well.
Well, I think I'll be leading off with the Japan experience again, because when I was on the public transport, they actually have toilets where they've got a toilet and they've got a separate changing room that's disability friendly for that person. So they can do their business in one room and then clean themselves up in the second room. And I thought that was a genius idea, because it doesn't affect the able-bodied people, because they still have their toilets on the other end, but it just gives them more room to do what they need to do. Because I've noticed some of the toilets in the public transport area, they don't fit wheelchairs. It's not wheelchair friendly in there. So I've noticed a couple of times, Sharmel, where I've had to literally get out of my wheelchair and actually grab my crutches, which is really dangerous, because my mobility is not as always good some days.
Yeah.
Because when you're having a bad day, your body gets a lot of ache and pain and just can't function properly. And I've nearly had falls where I've had to grab my crutch and try to pick it up, and it's been a horrible experience. And then the other thing is to try to get yourself off the toilet too without the help of your wheelchair. It's very difficult. So you're pretty much trying to get off the toilet seat without the proper help with your wheelchair, because that's what the wheelchair is there for. It's to help you to move around better. But because you have to leave it in one area of the room, because the toilet's so closed up, and it's hard to fit in, you've got to make a choice. Leave the wheelchair out so you have more room, or risk that you go busting, or 3, have the wheelchair in, but then you can't get out because there's not enough room. So the choices aren't very friendly. So that's the reason why I'm a big advocate for separate rooms, a changing room for people with disabilities, and a usable toilet for people with disabilities. And I would even go as far as to say, have like things that help people with disabilities clean up better. There's some special equipment that they can use to help you with that sort of aspect as well. There's special disability toilets in Japan that they make, and it makes the experience so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. So in regards to all that, do you think there are any positives of the Australian public transport system at all that could be outlined?
Positives would be at least you get to A and B.
Wow.
Yeah.
For me, positive is, in compare with other third world countries, Australia is very accessible with people who have disability, because some countries, they really don't have anything at all for transport.
And that's the point that we have to make too. While our public transport's not the best, it could be a lot worse, and at the same time we need to be grateful of what we've got too, and not just focus on the negative as well. So it needs to be a fine balance.
Yeah, and I think there's a huge, there are issues that need to be fixed, obviously, and there are many issues at that point as well. But I think, do you think that more people could even be hired just as consistent workers there who assist people with disabilities?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm one of the biggest advocates for people with disabilities to have a permanent job. Like, can you imagine this, right? You've got companies who can work for NDIS, and they can actually facilitate people with disabilities, and they can use it as a job, like a public transport officer. So what actually happens is that you go on an app or a website, you pick that NDIS provider, and then you arrange a time and date with that police transport officer and say, this is where I want to go. I want to go to Werribee to Melbourne Central. And then you meet up with that transport officer, and they take care of your trip and everything for the whole route of the time that you're going to the train.
Yeah.
From the time you get on to the time you get off, and that way it stops the train driver or bus driver from not doing their duties properly, because they have powers to say that if you do it, then you'll be fined or done some harsh punishment, because they have evidence
Yeah.
that you're not doing your job properly. And it makes you feel more safe and secure knowing that you have an advocate with you during that time, that you know you're going to get to A to B safely, and it's a more positive experience.
And I think especially if you're elderly or you have a disability, especially those, if you have to travel, out of the city at night, I think not only should you have, in this day and age, especially 24-hour, public transport, but even at the smaller stations, I think you should at least have, an indoor, restroom that's manned 24/7 with at least 1 or 2 security guards. Because if you get a vulnerable old lady that needs to get into a taxi at night, or even people like us, Storm, the reality is that you want someone that's got that's armed with pepper spray and a gun in the event that someone tries to mug you.
Yep, and I've noticed too that after about a certain time between 7 o'clock, after 7 o'clock, things get very, very dangerous, and you definitely feel very, very unsafe. So in my RMIT experience, when I did that course for about 3 or 4 years, I felt very, very unsafe in the city going back, because I had to study pretty late sometimes. I used to go back home by 7 o'clock, but by probably 6 o'clock, it felt very, very unsafe. Like you just couldn't. I always had to watch my back, and the people at night time, I don't know if you experienced, Nathan, they're very, very different.
Well,
it doesn't feel the same.
I get exactly what you mean, Storm. It's that whole thing where once you hit about 6 o'clock at night, everyone's mood just changes, and people are either very grumpy or they're very much in party mode. And I think that it's one of those things, like, especially I've had a small handful of experiences where I've been out with a friend at night, to see a movie or a show or whatever, and you're coming back on the train, and some drunk will try to talk to you.
Absolutely.
And it's just like, please just leave me. And I'm thinking, please just leave me alone. And I'm thinking, if I don't, talk to them, am I going to make them angry? What's going to happen?
You don't really know what the best course of action is, which is why we're advocating for disability police officers to join in that search, because you need to be able to feel safe and cared for any time of the day.
Absolutely.
So
and I think it's one of those things too where in Australia, don't get me wrong, it may not be the best, and it's obviously better than countries like India and things like that. But in terms of just because Australia's hit, when I say the standard, I mean like the bare minimum. When you look at places like, as you've said, Storm, with your experiences in Japan, Australia has a long way to go.
Well, I think the public transport in Australia is good. However, with the above examples mentioned in the podcast, it can be a lot more better. And I feel like if we follow the examples of the other countries, such as Japan and their public transport system and how it runs and flows, and with their etiquette and their experience, with the ability to solve situations of A, B, and C, then I reckon the public transport system in Australia could be world class, but we have a long way to go. And I feel like if we can just implement some of the things that we discussed in today's podcast, it'll go to a long way to ensure that the disability system works the best way it can be.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you, Storm, because I think, and I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people overseas always stereotype Australians as being very relaxed, she'll be right kind of thing. But I think
Yeah.
that's true in the sense that what especially our governments do as Australians is we basically go, we've met the bare minimum, we've got a better transport system than a third world country, so therefore that's good enough. But realistically, I think what we need to do is go, okay, how can we make it better? How can we make it, as good as, say, Japan, if not better than that? What do we need to do? I think, but, the government's so content with, oh, that'll do. And, we see that not just in transport, but in many areas of the government, from, NBN to, NDIS. It's basically, we need to not just be content with, oh, we've met the bare minimum, that'll do.
Yeah. I think that's the problem with the Australian culture at the moment, is that there's certain parts of our system where we just don't want to improve further, and we have the tools and resources to do that, but for whatever reason, we just don't want to do it.
Exactly.
Yep. And I can't help but agree. I think Australia has a long way to go. But aside from looking at other third world countries as well, we're doing well in our own sense, but we can always do better, and there's always room for improvement. I guess this brings us to the end of our podcast now. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And just please, thanks to Storm, Nathan, as well as Camille for being here.
Thank you, everyone. That's been a really
Thank you.
I'll just wrap it up with, I guess, a good old like, comment, and subscribe, as well as leave your comments.
Yeah, questions. Come on, guys.
We can get more content, and we need more content, guys. So give us everything you've got.
And send all your angry emails to Storm.
Yes, and I will defuse them as much as I can.
Amazing. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.